Ladies and gentlemen, it is Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and today we're going to be taking a look at the ground level perspective of units withdrawing from Lysychansk. And if you've been part of my Ukraine updates, you know that in the big picture, I think this is a necessary step for Ukrainian armed forces. But we forget that soldiers are people. I was a soldier, and also I think I'm a person. So let's see what it's like for the Lysychansk defenders. Let's get into it. And don't worry, YouTube censors and people, we are going to be skipping that part. I'll edit it right out.
This is the hell that's Lysychansk, and it's a hell that never falls silent. Look to the right of that huge black plume of smoke.
I mean, that is crazy, just the volume of fire
That
all over the city.
fresh puff is yet another shell exploding on an horizon already foggy with destruction. The city's being surrounded by Russian troops bit by bloody bit. This bridge over the railway was the main route in. The Russian circle's nearly complete.
Yeah, that sort of stuff is really scary if the Russians are probably deliberately trying to cut off escape routes from the city. Obviously, like we've talked about, there are ways in and out, especially the city itself. It's sort of a dense network of roads, like a lot of urban areas. But once you get to the suburbs, right, there's only a few major roadways that allow passage.
The attackers are using brute force to sledgehammer their way in from several directions. We drove in as they mounted their latest ferocious onslaught on the city's oil refinery, the second largest in Ukraine.
I don't think we should hang around here too long.
The fact that they were able to actually drive into Lysychansk is pretty incredible. As we've talked about, the Russians are almost certainly targeting the main vehicle accessible thoroughfares that allow entry and exit from the city. So it's the fact that these reporters were able to get through is pretty incredible to me. You think that perhaps they coordinated with the Russians ahead of time, told them that they were pressed, but Russia doesn't seem particularly concerned with general law of war practices like not targeting press. And because we've seen Ukrainian forces using civilian vehicles, driving in a civilian vehicle doesn't necessarily mean that you are safe.
It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon. Lysychansk is the last remaining stronghold in the Luhansk region of the...
Okay, I'm going to point this out as well. If you've ever, chemical fires are dangerous. No shocker there. But what happens is when you start to destroy oil refineries, chemical plants, areas with powerful, dangerous chemicals, and the explosion or fire will often aerosolize them. It'll pump them into the air. And that's extremely dangerous to breathe in. I'm honestly surprised that the reporter is not wearing a mask, given the massive amount of pollution that this destroyed plant is pumping out into the city. I mean, God only knows what is in that plume of smoke.
This city will be a monumental loss. Part of the plant is on fire. Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. But the Ukrainians are fighting the fight of their lives, and they've been battling over this pocket of the Donbass for months. We're with the soldiers of the 24th Brigade, sworn to secrecy about their exact location inside the plant. They're on the move to another fighting position. The Russian troops are 500 meters away, and they've come under savage attack here. But they're bitterly disappointed about losing their twin city of Severodonetsk. It's made their defense of Lysychansk all the more important.
Yeah, we've talked about this in other videos. The idea holding on to Lysychansk is really, really difficult. Now, the problem that they may not realize is that even if they are able to hold Lysychansk or areas of it now, the concern is that the Russians are enveloping Lysychansk, Lysychansk, right? They are enveloping the areas, and they're trying to cut off the rural areas where there's only a few roads leading to and from the city. If the Russians can cut those off, defenders like these guys will run out of food and ammunition very quickly, and the Russians will be able to deal a massive amount of casualties, in many cases without firing a shot. As we saw in Mariupol, where the defenders were essentially surrounded, cut off, and then just wait it out. The Russians never really had to push and clear tunnel by tunnel to get the defenders out. They simply relied on having them run out of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. And that's what they would do to the defenders in Lysychansk if they are Lysychansk. Damn it, these stupid British pronunciations have screwed me up, right? Lysychansk. The idea is that, of course, the defenders here will have the same fate, but as we've seen on the tactical map, there are thousands of these defenders. It would be a massive blow to Ukrainians' armed forces if they were to lose them. So they have to be withdrawn from the city and repositioned in a place where they can be properly supplied.
They don't want to give up an inch of territory, but they followed their orders. Yes, it was the right decision, he says. Better to save lives. But every bit swallowed up by the Russians hurts, and their enemies are making slow but steady progress. We are going out, but some other units will stay, the battalion commander tells us. He goes on to insist no one's leaving Lysychansk. We just want to regroup in a better position, he says.
Yeah, it's probably true, but they have to leave Lysychansk, right? Instead, what I think you're going to see is when he talks about the other units staying in position, what this is a reference to is the bounding movement, right? This is the idea that at the battalion level, right, someone's going to have to fight the Russians while someone else repositions within the city. Then the other unit is going to bound back, and that previous unit that did the moving, they are going to engage. So it's going to ensure that, just like we talk about in our individual soldier tactics, right? When we look at individual soldiers, where individual soldiers, one will shoot, one will move, he'll start shooting, the other one will move. You have that same effect, that same bounding maneuver at a unit level. You can have it platoons, companies, in this case, even battalions.
But the Ukrainian hold on this city looks very tenuous right now. But even as they hastily relocated, there was an air of this being the final battle for Lysychansk. They've held the Russians at bay for weeks now, forcing some heavy losses on them and buying time to build up defenses in Donetsk, the second half of the Donbass where the Russians will move to next. But they're coming under intense pressure on the Donbass battlefield, and even relocating involves casualties as they're forced to run the gauntlet of fresh shelling. Amid the mayhem of this grim fighting, the explosions and hurry to shift has led to a head-on crash. The injured are having to be rapidly extracted and treated, whilst the heavy smog offers them some slight cover.
Yeah, this is actually illustrative of one of the biggest dangers in combat that people don't appreciate, is accidental deaths, right? Mechanized warfare involves, well, machines. But these machines are tough to operate, especially when you talk about vehicles. And in combat, remember, the enemy's goal is to make the environment as inhospitable to you as possible, and your goal is to make their environment inhospitable. So it makes sense that having to maneuver quickly, having to relocate rapidly under fire, that mistakes are going to happen. Even just, for example, the drivers of one of those vehicles may have literally just fallen asleep. They may have been up for 36 hours of fighting and finally got the order to retreat and fell asleep behind the wheel. Something that happens to drivers all the time. But in the civilian world, right, the consequences of pulling over and taking a nap for 2 hours, the consequences of managing your drive time are minimal. You know, you maybe your boss will call you angry. But here, there is no time to spare, and it's not uncommon to expect soldiers to fight for 24, 36, 72 hours straight. I've done it. We've all done it. And that is when it's in those states that mistakes happen. And this is a perfect illustration of that sort of thing. So it's just as much it is just as casualty producing in some cases as combat operations are accidents. Definitely was the case in Afghanistan. And it's sort of, I understand that, you know, accidental injuries are not treated the same as accidents to enemy fire, but I think there's a difference between an accident like I tripped getting out of the shower and a vehicle on a combat patrol rolled over. There should be some sort of recognition that combat operations are hard, mistakes happen, or things you just can't control. There were roads in Afghanistan where I was like, I don't think this road can support our vehicle, but we have no choice. If we don't cross it, we can't get back to our base. So we just had to remove the sensitive items from the vehicle and have someone who is a confident driver do their best to kind of drive across this very narrow stretch that looked really unstable. And the truth is, it would have been a non-combat injury, but man, it felt almost as dangerous as a firefight.
Those who make it out alive from the line of fire are utterly exhausted and high on relief and almost surprised they're still in one piece.
Всем привет! Hello!
But there's a growing exasperation at what they see as the delay in sending long-range artillery and better weapons for them.
I gotta say, the standardization of their equipment, you can really see these are Ukrainian regulars. Look at the fact that all of these had the exact same digital camo pattern, sort of like a slightly darker ACU, but that to me is actually a sign that these are probably a regular battalion. These aren't like a volunteer force or anything like that. They do all have different helmets though.
This fighting.
It would be much better if you send us some new weapons.
Are you struggling with the stuff you've got at the moment?
Well, can't say that we're struggling, but it would be much better, you know. They take high losses, we need to retreat, but in the end, again, they will go forward again.
One thing I'm going to point out, these guys, one, you can see the casualty rates that some of them have taken. Some of these guys do not look like classic light infantry soldiers. This gentleman here looks like he is probably in his maybe late 40s, early 50s. As with this gentleman, I think this is a all-white goatee. So that's a sign that, as we've seen, the casualty rates have been high, and the replacements, and this is true in any war, are generally just a little bit worse every time, right? The replacements are a little bit more hastily trained, right? Maybe they were people who wanted to enlist but couldn't for medical reasons, and now they're being wavered in. Maybe they had a criminal record. Maybe in his case, they were too old. But I gotta say, their equipment does look professional, right? The goggles, the helmet. This is a totally proper, level 5A vest or whatever they call them. Like, this is something that like we would wear in Afghanistan. Not quite the same, but very, very similar.
NATO and the rest of Europe.
Stop being
The foot soldiers aren't mincing their words.
a great amount of losses.
So what's your message to NATO and the rest of Europe?
Stop being
Oh man, yeah.
The foot soldiers aren't mincing their words anymore.
It's really frustrating when you know that you could. NATO has the power to, equip Ukrainian forces with everything they need to win. NATO could do it. They just are choosing not to try to strike a balance between helping Russia or not aggravating Russia and helping Ukraine. And that's got to be a tough feeling to see your buddies die, not because the technology or resources to beat your enemy doesn't exist. Your friends have them. They're just not quite willing to share them at the proper rate, at a rate you find appropriate.
Determination and courage here that far outstrips the diminishing odds of victory, even as they race to a front to replace colleagues and where they're vastly outnumbered and outflanked.
Yep, this is what we talked about. You see how this road is able to have two-way traffic even for tanks. This is the sort of extremely important thoroughfare that will make or break access to the city, right? If you can cut off these, there's only a handful of roads based on the map that will allow you to access Lysychansk with this level of vehicle flow. Again, men and material going to the front, fresh men and material going to the front, tired, wounded, broken equipment, all headed back to refit. And the roads that can do this for things as heavy as tanks and trucks are limited. So control over those roads is a game changer.
They're still showing peace signs, so I'm getting the impression they're still very optimistic. What's your feeling?
Ми так само. Ми завжди за. Ми Україну не здамо.
Right, this guy looks like he is maybe in his late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s.
19-year-old Eugene has a face etched with the grime of war and seeing friends die in Severodonetsk. He spent 4 months sleeping and battling inside this armoured vehicle. He's old enough to fight and nearly die, but young enough to question withdrawing from Lysychansk.
Конечно, обидно, то, что если...
I mean, yeah, he feels that they're just giving it to them. It's understandable. It's understandable to fight for territory and then leave. Trust me, I know. I mean, I watched the Afghan withdrawal. I feel for the guy, but they would lose thousands if they didn't.
Ми просто його, считай, почти віддали. Сєвєродонецьк, да, нас там задавили, а з Лисичанська просто починаємо виходити. Ну, лично моє мнение, там можна було б ще хоч трохи не подати.
But the city is being changed beyond recognition, with every major landmark in the center damaged or destroyed. It's a mass of debris and...
Yep, this is one of the things we've talked about in other videos, the Russian strategy, right? The advantage of the blitz they tried initially that NATO forces generally rely on, that allows for the preservation of a lot of infrastructure. A lot. And the Russian strategy is simply to obliterate the territory before they take it with indirect fire. And it's a way to seize territory, but that territory becomes valueless. It's really a scorched earth, but instead of scorching earth as you withdraw, it's scorched earth and then you seize it. It's a really inefficient way to conduct warfare, but it is a way to achieve reliable victories, as we've seen.
Destruction. The city's authorities and police say already about 3/4 of the area is devastated. There are several thousand residents still here, where the rumble of deadly weaponry is now part of their daily routine and increased with a savage intensity over the past few days.
If there's one thing we've learned over the past 2 years, guys, it's that no matter what change you make, there's a subset of the population that refuses to do anything. You would be, I mean, some people have no choice, and I acknowledge that, but many of these people may have had a choice and just clung to the delusion that they should stay. In psychology, we call it a normalcy bias. This is the idea that when you're confronted with new information, you cling to the idea that you can continue with business as usual, despite all the evidence to the contrary. And it's a human function of the fact that simply we prefer normal, right? You know, how lost and disoriented would you feel if tomorrow you woke up and, you know, didn't have to go to work, but like couldn't go to work? Even if, again, you may think, I don't really like work, but the massive disruption to the normal routine is in itself something that human beings don't really generally like. So you can see here, there's a subset of people who just view this as who just are clinging to the idea that they can continue with business as usual and only make small adjustments to their lives. Obviously, after months of fighting, their lives probably have been massively changed anyway, but at least they're still in their house. I don't know. It's hard to understand.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armory which is trying to encircle the city, and they keep landing every 2 minutes.
I think she meant to say they're like doing a barrage every 2 minutes, and that whistling is the rounds passing overhead.
We saw no sign of any Russian troops inside Lysychansk, despite Russian claims, but we did spot the Ukrainians driving back captured Russian armor, their blue and yellow flag flying above it now. But even amid this small triumph, there are shells coming in, forcing the curious nearby residents to take cover again.
Jesus. Just I don't understand the looky-loos. I don't. It's like, I mean, even the Afghans had the good sense to be like, if there's going to be fighting, there's going to be an explosion, don't be nearby. If they were around, I was like, we're safe. They know better than anybody when we're in danger. And if they're chilling, then like, I don't want, we could never like chill, but if they're chilling, we are more likely safe than not. It's when they just don't go near you, right, that they know that danger is afoot. Yeah, gotta say, I mean, withdrawing the equipment, we talked about this, is one of the harder tasks, right? Taking captured equipment back to your friendly lines, but boy, would it be a tough one to do.
The Ukrainians are inflicting some serious casualties on their Russian enemies, but it's still not enough to hold them back.
Again, she seems confused. This is part of a deliberate withdrawal effort from Lysychansk, to be clear. The Ukrainians are withdrawing because if they leave troops in Lysychansk, they will get cut off. There's only one roadway out, and if that roadway gets cut off, those troops are trapped without food, fuel, supplies, or munitions.
Civilians led us to the body of...
Okay, this is where they start talking about this, they found some Russian body and they use it for a news story, which I think is kind of dark. We're not going to talk about it. This just interviews more civilians who, we try to understand their completely nonsense thinking about staying in a combat area. Listen, if you're not a combatant, run, flee from combat. All you are doing is making it harder for combatants. You are making it harder for yourself. You are putting yourself in grave danger. Don't do it. Leave combat zones. If you're a civilian. I can't believe I have to put out this PSA. Anyway, guys, if you want me to react to some videos that are too spicy for YouTube, right, you want to join the Patreon. Thanks to my Lieutenant tier patrons. I'll see you in the next one.